My name is Riley. I'm 27. And the night my life finally split in two began with a family dinner I never wanted. When I stepped into my parents' house that Sunday, folding chairs and borrowed tables were jammed into every corner. 33 relatives, all dressed like they were headed to some church banquet, turned and stared at me like I'd walked into the wrong film. No one hugged me. No one said, "Happy to see you." A few people barely nodded, then went back to talking like I was a stranger who wandered in off the street. I should have turned around and left. Instead, I sat down in the one empty chair at the far end of the table. Food was already being passed, but no one asked if I wanted a plate. Nobody made space. I just sat there listening to them laugh about promotions, weddings, baby showers, every milestone I apparently did not qualify for. Then my mom stood up. She walked to the wall where all the perfect family photos were lined up, grabbed the frames with my face in them, and ripped them down one by one. Glass clinked, and the room went silent. She tossed my pictures into the trash can they had conveniently placed beside the table and said loud enough for everyone to hear that I was a leech who would drain this family dry. My dad did not tell her to stop. He looked straight at me and demanded I pay back every dollar they had ever spent raising me. That I was nothing but a wasted investment. My sister shoved her chair back, stood up, and gestured toward the door like she was escorting a problem customer out of a store. I did not cry. I did not argue. I picked up my bag, walked out of the house they had just erased me from, and called a ride back to my apartment. They thought that was the end. They had no idea I had been quietly tracking what they were doing to my name and my credit for months, and that this dinner was the final push I needed to turn their perfect little show into the kind of legal revenge they would never see coming. If you want to know how an outsider daughter turned one humiliating dinner into the night her parents finally paid for everything they did in the dark, stay with me until the end. When I got back to my apartment that night, my hands were shaking, but not from what they said, from what they had just confirmed. They did not see me as a daughter anymore. I was a line item, a debt, something they thought they owned the receipt for. I dropped my keys on the counter, kicked off my shoes, and went straight for my laptop on the kitchen table. I did not text anyone. I did not post anything. I opened a blank document and typed one sentence at the top in all caps so I would not forget why I was doing this. This is not about hurt feelings. This is about what they did to my name. While the screen glowed in the dark apartment, I started rewinding everything I knew about my family. My mom is Karen, a senior loan officer at a local credit union just outside Austin. The kind of person who loves reminding you she understands money every time you try to decide without her. My dad is Robert, co-owner of a heating and air company. Proud of building it from nothing and proud of reminding me how much it cost to raise me. My older sister Allison is the guidance counselor you see on school brochures. All soft smiles and inspirational quotes on Facebook. We are the Carter family, the polished Texas household with matching Christmas sweaters and staged photos at every barbecue, graduation, and church event. Offline, it has always been different. When I told them I was going into UX design instead of accounting or nursing, Karen called it a phase and asked when I planned to get a real job. Robert would joke in front of everyone that I was the creative one, which in his voice meant the irresponsible one. Every choice I made that did not match their script became a debt they believed I owed. In college, Karen insisted I open a joint account with her just to help manage your bills so you don't mess up your credit. Back then, I was 19 and exhausted and signed whatever she slid in front of me. She set up online banking on my laptop, saved every password, and told me not to change them because I'm the one fixing things when you forget to pay. Years later, after I moved to Austin and got my own place and my own job, she was still the one who had my social security number memorized, still the one who insisted my mail should go to their house because it is safer. I thought it was just controlling. I did not think it was criminal until the letters started showing up. A few months before that dinner, I got a notice from a bank I had never heard of thanking me for applying for a personal loan. I assumed it was junk mail and tossed it. Then another envelope arrived, this time about a new line of credit. Around the same time, the free credit score app on my phone pinged me with a drop that made no sense. I was paying my one credit card on time. I was current on my student loans. Nothing I was actually using explained that drop. I screenshotted it, planned to call someone, and then my week filled up with deadlines and meetings, and I let it go. That night, after the dinner, I did not let it go. I pulled up annual credit report and requested my reports from every bureau. While the files downloaded, I forced myself to sit still, breathing slow, letting the anger burn down just enough so I would not make careless mistakes. When the PDFs opened, it felt like someone had flipped on harsh fluorescent lights in a room I had only ever seen by candlelight. There were accounts I had never seen before, opened in cities I had never lived in, all tied to versions of my name and my old address at my parents' house. Small personal loans, a store card, a line of credit that had been maxed out and then rolled into a consolidation loan. The dates lined up perfectly with the years I had been too busy to read every piece of mail they forwarded to me. The mailing address on almost every account was my parents' home. The phone number on several was Karen's. For a second, I just stared at the screen, waiting for some other explanation to appear. It did not. I made a new folder on my desktop and started dragging everything into it. Credit reports, screenshots of the alerts on my phone, photos I had taken of old envelopes back when I thought they were just strange spam. I grabbed a notebook and started writing down account numbers by hand, circling every one that listed my parents' address instead of mine. Then I went to the government website for identity theft and followed the steps one by one. I filed an official report explaining how someone with access to my personal information and my old joint account had opened lines of credit without my consent and routed them through an address I no longer lived at. I answered every form like I was speaking to a jury. After that, I placed fraud alerts with each credit bureau, then initiated a freeze, locking down my files so no one could open anything new in my name without layers of verification. Only when all of that was finished did I open my design software. If there was one thing I knew how to do, it was take a messy story and make it impossible to look away from. I built a simple infographic, nothing fancy, just clean icons, bold numbers, and short lines of text about how identity theft can start inside your own family. I did not put any names in it. Not mine, not theirs. Just patterns, warning signs, and one quiet line at the bottom that said, "This had happened to me." I saved it under a generic file name that did not scream revenge, exported it, and stared at the final image. They thought keeping everything in the dark would protect them. I was done leaving anything in the dark. The next morning, my phone looked like it had been through a car wreck. The lock screen was nothing but a wall of missed calls and text previews stacked on top of each other. First it was Robert around 5 a.m. call after call like he thought persistence alone could pull me back into their house. Then Allison started around 7 with 20 missed calls, followed by messages about how I had humiliated everyone and how I owed mom and dad an apology. By 10, Karen joined in, not with the anger from the night before, but with long paragraphs that began with, "We need to talk calmly about this," and ended with, "Please pick up just once." I stood in the kitchen in an old t-shirt, watching the numbers climb. Every buzz tightened my chest, but I did not open a single thing. I just took screenshots of the notifications one by one and saved them in the same folder as the credit reports, receipts, patterns, proof that they only reached for me when they needed something or when they realized they had finally gone too far. I made coffee, sat at the table, and opened my laptop again. The infographic from last night was still on the screen, all clean lines and muted colors, quietly screaming, "This can happen inside your own family." I uploaded it to an anonymous account I kept on a large discussion site in a subreddit about personal finance and credit. The title was simple. My family used my identity for years. Here's what I wish I had noticed sooner. I attached the image, typed a short caption about someone close abusing access to my information, and hit post before I could overthink it. Then I did the same on LinkedIn, but toned down, framed as an educational piece about red flags and why monitoring your credit matters. I removed anything that could directly point to my parents. I was not after public drama. I wanted pressure. For a while, nothing happened. I answered a few work emails, pushed a prototype update to my team, and pretended my life was not on fire. Then the notifications changed. People started commenting, asking questions, sharing their own stories about parents and spouses opening accounts behind their backs. It was comforting and horrifying at the same time to see how common it was. One DM stood out. The username was generic, but the message felt uncomfortably familiar. They thanked me for posting, said the layout made it easy to follow, then added a line that made my skin prickle. Some of this sounds exactly like what my sister has been doing to the family. A minute later, another message came from the same account. Riley, is this you? I froze. Very few people know I do UX work and side design projects, and even fewer could recognize my layout style from one infographic. I stared at the screen for a long second before replying to ask who it was. The response came almost instantly. It's Janine, my mom's older sister, the accountant, the one who always seemed slightly outside the family photos, like she had been added in at the last second. She asked if we could talk somewhere that was not the group chat Karen used to blast holiday plans. We switched to a private call. I stepped onto my tiny balcony as morning traffic hummed below. Janine sounded tired in a way that had nothing to do with age. She said she had seen my post on LinkedIn first, then found the same graphic reposted on Reddit, and something in her stomach dropped. She told me that a couple of years earlier Karen had helped her restructure debt after a rough stretch with freelance clients. She said she signed a stack of paperwork because Karen told her it was just consolidating credit cards into one payment. Janine thought it was easier to let the money person handle it. Recently, though, letters had started arriving about a loan Janine swore she had never taken. When she asked Karen, my mom brushed it off as a clerical mistake and told her to ignore it. As Janine spoke, I opened another new file and started typing every detail she shared. Bank names, rough dates, the amounts she remembered, the exact words my mom had used. At one point, Janine paused and asked very quietly, Harper, did she do this to you, too? I told her about my credit reports, about the accounts I never opened, about my name still being tied to their address years after I moved out. I could hear her breathing on the other end, the slow inhale of someone realizing a long-held suspicion was finally real. She said she had never trusted how Karen pushed herself into everyone's finances, but had convinced herself it was just control, not a crime. I thought I owed her for helping, she admitted. Now it feels like I paid with interest I never agreed to. We agreed she would scan and email every piece of paperwork she could find, every collector letter, every error Karen had told her to dismiss. When we hung up, I had a fresh stack of puzzle pieces and a very clear picture forming in my head. This was not just about me. This was a pattern. My phone buzzed again with a call from Robert, then from Karen, then from a cousin. I let it ring, watching their names flash. For years, they acted like I was draining them. Now I was starting to see how many people they had quietly drained to keep the image of a successful, generous family intact. I turned my ringer off, opened my files, and started building a timeline that did not care about holidays, bloodlines, or hurt feelings. It only cared about dates, amounts, and signatures. Allison texted me 2 days later like nothing truly catastrophic had happened. She sent one line asking if I could meet her for coffee downtown to talk like adults, as if I had been the one tearing pictures off the wall. I almost ignored it, but she followed with, "It's about mom and money. Please." Snorts, that second sentence did what 33 relatives yelling could not. It made me curious. We met at a cafe a few blocks from my office, the kind with hanging plants and overpriced cold brew. Allison was already there, sitting in the corner with her school lanyard shoved into her purse, eyes shadowed like she had not slept since the dinner. When she saw me, she tried to smile, and it collapsed halfway. I sat across from her, hands wrapped around a mug just to keep them steady. For a minute, we just existed in the same space. Two people with the same last name and no idea how to talk without pretending everything was fine. Finally, she said she was sorry about how things went at the dinner. Not sorry for what she did, just sorry it got messy. She blamed stress, the economy, pressure on mom and dad, as if any of that explained being pushed out of your own family like you crashed a stranger's party. I let her talk until the excuses ran dry. Then I pulled a folder from my bag and slid it between us. Inside were copies of my Clear's Throat credit reports with every account I did not open highlighted. I told her I was filing identity theft, that fraud alerts were already on my file, that regulators and the bank would start asking questions she would not like. Her face drained of color when she saw her parents' address repeated next to my name. She tried to say Karen had just been helping, that mom knew how to get better rates, that this was how families worked when they trusted each other. I asked when trust started meaning signing someone else's name on a loan. That ended it. I pointed to a mid-sized loan opened 3 years ago. Another credit line rolled into consolidation, all using my old joint account information and my social security number. Then I showed her the email Janine had forwarded to me, the one where mom reassured her that a strange letter from a lender was just a mix-up and to ignore it. Allison read it twice, her eyebrows pulling together in a way that looked more like recognition than surprise. When I asked her directly if mom had ever used her information for anything, she paused just long enough to answer without actually saying no. Eventually, she admitted there had been a few times mom had handled things for her as well. Times when Allison was busy starting her new job and did not want to deal with paperwork. A small consolidation, mom had called it. A harmless co-sign on a refinance. Allison signed a few pages because mom told her exactly where to initial and where to date, and that felt easier than reading every line. As she spoke, I opened my laptop and pulled up another copy of my notes. I asked Allison if she remembered the bank names, the rough dates, any amounts at all. She did. Too many of them matched the lenders on Janine's letters and the ones tied to my own file. It stopped looking like separate favors and started looking like a system. The more Allison dug up old memories, the more they snapped into the pattern I had already been forming in my head. Mom would step in during a crisis, offer to fix everything, collect signatures when people were exhausted or overwhelmed, then quietly redirect just enough money to cover whatever she and Robert wanted next, whether that meant paying down business debt or remodeling a kitchen. When I mentioned Grandma Marion, something flickered across Allison's face again. She said mom had handled everything when Marion sold her house and moved into the independent living community. She went to every meeting, screened every call, brought a neat little check to the moving party, and told everyone the rest went to fees and taxes. That explanation had never fully sat right with Allison. But every time she tried to ask questions, Karen snapped at her for being ungrateful. I typed as Allison talked, building a rough timeline. Year 1, I start college and open a joint account with mom. Year 2, Janine hits a rough season with clients and mom steps in. Year 3, grandma sells her house. Year 4, Robert's HVAC business suddenly has a new work truck and a remodeled office. On paper, it was all numbers. In real life, it was favors, guilt, and years of Karen reminding everyone how much they owed her. When I told Allison I had already filed with the FTC, her eyes widened. When I explained that mom's own credit union would be forced to investigate once they saw how many loans traced back to employees' relatives, she finally stopped trying to rationalize it. For a few seconds, she just stared at the table, then quietly asked what I planned to do next. I told her I was going to talk to a lawyer, not to sue the family for sport, but to protect myself before their mess completely burned down my financial future. If that meant dragging the whole rotten structure into the light, then so be it. Allison swallowed hard and said she would send me every email, text, and screenshots she had involving Mom and money, especially anything connected to Grandma or Janine. She admitted she did not want Mom to go to jail, but she was exhausted from living with the constant feeling that something was wrong and she was helping hide it. As we wrapped up, my phone buzzed again with a text from an unknown number containing one blurry photo. My dad standing next to a classic-looking HVAC truck, grinning with a beer in his hand. The caption read, "Funny how fast that upgrade showed up after Grandma sold the house, huh?" It was from my uncle on my dad's side, the one who had always half-joked about Robert forgetting where the family money came from. I showed the picture to Allison and watched the last piece of denial fall from her face. On the bus ride home, I sent an email to a consumer rights attorney whose name kept appearing in threads about financial abuse. I attached a condensed version of my timeline, the documents I had so far, and told them in plain language that what started as a humiliating family dinner had turned into a trail of signatures, loans, and missing money that all pointed back to the same two people. My parents thought they used that night to publicly cut me off. What they actually did was hand me the final clue I needed to follow the money straight back to them. A week after I met Allison, my mom showed up at my office like she was stopping by for lunch. I found out because the receptionist slacked me. "Hey, there is a woman here asking for you. Says she is your mother. She looks intense." I walked into the lobby and there she was in her best work blazer, hair perfectly sprayed, clutching a leather folder like she was about to sell someone a mortgage. She smiled wide when she saw me, the same smile she used on neighbors and church people. "Riley," she said, standing like we were two professionals meeting for a casual check-in. "Can we talk?" I glanced at the receptionist, at the cameras tucked into the ceiling corners, and said we could talk right there. No closed doors, no private conference room. Karen did not like that, but she sat anyway. She started with an apology, the kind you give when you are more worried about appearances than damage. She said things got heated at the dinner, that everyone was emotional, that she did not mean every word. She kept circling back to how hard things had been for her and Robert, how much pressure they were under, how ungrateful it felt when I walked out of a family gathering. I let her talk until she showed her real reason for coming. "I saw something online," she said, lowering her voice. "Some infographic about families and identity theft. People are talking. I need to know what you have been saying about us." There it was. Not "Are you okay?" Not "Did I hurt you?" Just "What are you telling people that could make my life harder?" I told her I posted an educational graphic about what can happen when someone abuses access to another person's financial information. I reminded her I used no names, mentioned no locations, and pointed to no one directly. Then I told her I had filed an official identity theft report and frozen my credit. I told her banks and regulators would start asking questions about what she did with my social security number and our old joint account. The color drained from her face. For a second, the polite tone dropped. "Do you have any idea what you have done to my career?" she snapped. "To this family?" I told her I had a very clear idea of what she had done to my credit, to Janine's, and probably to Grandma's too. Long before I clicked submit on any report, I pulled a printed summary from my bag and slid it across the coffee table, the one I prepared for the attorney I was already speaking with. It was not everything, just enough to prove I was not guessing. Dates, lenders, balances, and the same home address repeating again and again. Karen stared at it, jaw tight. "You do not understand how this works," she said, trying to take control again. "I know people at these places. I know how to structure loans so they look good on paper. I did this to help you build credit, to help Janine, to help Mom. No one complained until you decided to make a spectacle." I reminded her that helping usually involves telling people what they are signing, not forging signatures and telling them to ignore collector letters. I mentioned the email Janine had where Karen called a serious notice a clerical error. I mentioned the timeline of money that flowed into her accounts and Robert's business after major family milestones. Her eyes flashed. For a moment, I thought she might actually yell at me right there in the lobby. Instead, she leaned in and dropped her voice, which somehow felt worse. "You are my daughter," she said. Like that gave her legal control over my existence. "We do not take each other to court. We do not air family business in front of strangers. You want your credit fixed? I'll fix it. I will make a few calls, shift some things around, but you need to stop whatever you've started. Take down whatever you posted. Tell whoever you talked to that it was a misunderstanding." Behind her, my boss Trevor had stepped out of a conference room and was pretending to scroll his phone. He was close enough to hear every word. I looked my mother straight in the eye and told her no. I was not deleting anything. I was not calling this a misunderstanding. I was not going to help her keep this hidden just because she was scared of what it might do to her job title. She leaned back, eyes cold now, and said, "If this blows up, it will hurt all of us. Do you really want to be responsible for that?" I told her she had it backward. She was the one who had been signing her name across other people's lives for years. I was just finally writing my own. She stood up fast enough to smack the leather folder against the table. "You're making a mistake," she said through clenched teeth. "When this comes back on you, don't come running to me." She walked out of the building without looking at Trevor, her heels clicking on the tile like a metronome. After she left, he came over and asked if I was okay. I gave him a cleaned-up version, just enough to explain there might be some uncomfortable calls coming into the office. Instead of distancing himself, he offered to bring in our company legal team if my mom showed up again or if anyone started bothering me at work. That small gesture, someone believing me the first time, felt like oxygen. Over the next few weeks, the ripple effect spread. Janine sent me scans of everything she uncovered. Loan documents with questionable signatures, payoff statements that did not match what she remembered, emails where Karen told her not to overthink the numbers. With my permission, my attorney forwarded some of it to the compliance department at Karen's credit union. They were already reviewing her because of the identity theft report and how many loans were tied to relatives. Now they had more than red flags. They had a pattern. A state investigator called to ask follow-up questions about my complaint. It was not dramatic. No flashing badges or movie moments, just a calm voice going through dates and accounts, confirming that I had not approved any of it. Every time I said no, I felt something heavy shift a little more in my favor. At night, when anger kept me awake, I worked on something new. The infographic had done what it needed to do, but I wanted a place where people could find real steps if they were dealing with the same thing. I built a simple website from scratch. Nothing fancy, just a clean landing page explaining how financial abuse and identity theft can happen inside families, links to government resources, and a section where I broke my story into anonymized case study pieces. I did not name my parents. I did not need to. The facts were ugly enough on their own. I watched traffic slowly climb as people shared the site in forums and group chats. Some were strangers. Some I realized were relatives. A cousin I had not heard from in years emailed me from a personal account saying the layout of my case study felt uncomfortably familiar and asking if she should pull her own credit reports. I told her yes. Meanwhile, the texts from my parents shifted from anger to days of silence. Nothing. Then a sudden burst from Robert about families sticking together and outsiders trying to tear us apart. The outsiders he meant were investigators and auditors who did not care about our last name. He was right about one thing. Something was tearing us apart. It just was not the people asking questions. It was the answers. It took a few months for everything to catch up with them, which somehow made it feel even more real. This was not a dramatic movie moment where cops showed up right after a big speech. It was slower and quieter, like a fuse burning under the floorboards. First came the formal letter from Karen's credit union, the one she had bragged about working at for over 20 years. I received a copy through my attorney. It said they were conducting an internal review into multiple loan files connected to her and might contact me for verification. A week later, another envelope arrived from the state regulator's office asking permission to use my complaint and documentation as part of a broader investigation. I signed every form. I wanted every flashlight possible pointed at what they had been doing. I did not witness most of what followed in person. I heard about it in fragments. Like watching a house you once lived in being torn down from a few blocks away. Janine told me about her interview first. She said she sat in a conference room with 2 compliance officers and a lawyer, hands folded so tightly in her lap they hurt, and walked them through every favor Karen had done over the last 5 years. The consolidation loan, the refinance, the things no one had fully explained. The times Karen told her to ignore letters because these companies make mistakes all the time. They showed Janine documents with signatures that did not look like hers and asked if she had ever given Karen permission to sign for her. She said no. They asked if she had ever received the full amounts those loans claimed she had. Again, no. Grandma Marion came next. She was too frail to sit through long meetings, so her lawyer arranged a deposition at the Independent Living Center. From what he later told me, Marion cried when she saw on paper how much money had passed through Karen's hands when her house was sold. There were proceeds she had never seen and fees no one had explained. She had trusted her daughter to look out for her. Instead, it appeared Karen had looked out for herself and for Robert's business first. Somewhere in the middle of all that, my dad tried his own version of damage control. He called one afternoon and launched into a speech about outsiders tearing the family apart and investigators who did not understand how families help each other off the books. When I calmly told him that forging signatures and rerouting loan proceeds was not helping, he switched tactics and asked if I could just tell them it was all a misunderstanding and that I had overreacted. I said no. He hung up. The official fallout began with my mom's job. Her credit union placed her on leave, which was their polite way of saying, "Don't come back while we figure out how deep this goes." The co-workers she had known for 20 years were suddenly auditing loans she had personally processed. Many of those loans carried familiar last names. Cousins, in-laws, my own. The pattern was impossible to miss. Then came the civil case. Janine and my grandmother's lawyer filed suit, not only against Karen, but against both of my parents, arguing they had benefited from money obtained through fraud and misrepresentation. My name appeared in the filings as well, listed as a victim of identity theft and unauthorized credit accounts. My attorney asked if I wanted to be there in person for the first hearing. I thought about it for a long time and said no. I did not need to sit in a courtroom and watch my mother pretend she did not recognize her own handwriting. Instead, I signed an affidavit, swore it in front of a notary, and let my paperwork speak for me. Allison went. She texted me afterwards saying she had never seen Mom look so small. Karen and Robert showed up with their own attorney, dressed like it was Sunday at church, not the start of the most humiliating chapter of their lives. From what my lawyer described, their defense was exactly what I expected. They leaned hard on the idea of family arrangements, on verbal understandings, on helping relatives through hard times. They suggested that confusion and sloppiness, not intent, had created the mess. But every time they tried to frame it as a string of accidents, there were numbers that did not line up, signatures that looked off, and timelines that felt a little too convenient. Money moved in right when their business needed a boost, right when they wanted to upgrade a truck or fix up the house, right after another relative had signed something they did not fully understand. The investigators did not care about holiday photos or church attendance or who brought what to Thanksgiving. They cared about documentation. They cared about how my mom's login appeared on loan files tied to relatives. About how her notes mentioned strong relationship with borrower while those same borrowers like Janine sat across from them and said, "I did not agree to any of this." Eventually, the credit union made its decision. They fired my mom for violating multiple internal policies and reported her to the state. Her license was suspended while they decided whether she would ever be allowed to work in that field again. All those years of bragging about being the one who understood money ended with her being escorted out of a building she once treated like her second home. On the civil side, my parents settled before things could get worse. They agreed to repay the money that should have gone to Janine and Grandma, plus additional damages. They agreed to have every loan they had opened in my name and Janine's name unwound and removed. They did it not because they suddenly grew a conscience, but because their lawyer explained that fighting it would expose them to even more scrutiny, maybe even criminal charges if the wrong prosecutor paid attention. They did not have the cash to cover it all. So they did what people like them always swore they would never have to do. They sold the house in the suburbs, the one with the wall of family photos that no longer included me. They sold the miracle truck my dad loved posing with. They sold off part of his company, bringing in a partner who, according to one cousin, made it clear he was there to clean up the mess, not protect Robert's pride. News travels fast in a family like ours. Some relatives were furious with me at first, convinced I had gone too far, that I had gone nuclear instead of keeping things in-house. Those same relatives grew a lot quieter once letters arrived encouraging them to check their own accounts for irregularities. A few reached out privately to thank me, even if they would never say it out loud at a reunion. The last time my dad called, it was late, his voice rough. He said I had destroyed everything, that the family was broke, that Mom might never work in her field again, that people at church were whispering. He said he hoped I was happy, living my little independent life while they suffered. I let him talk until he ran out of words. Then I told him the only thing that felt true. I did not destroy anything. I just stopped covering for what they had been doing for years. The hole they were standing in was one they had dug themselves. I had simply stepped out of it. He stayed quiet for a long time after that. When he finally spoke, his voice was smaller. She said she never thought it would reach this point. I told her it reached this point the very first time Karen signed someone else's name on a loan. The only real difference was that someone had finally turned the lights on. A few more months went by and the version of my family that lived on social media and in my childhood memories finally stopped lining up with the one that existed in real life. Information made its way back to me in fragments. My parents had left the big suburban house and moved into a tight rental on the edge of town, the kind of place you pass without noticing. The yard Robert once obsessed over was gone. The wall of framed photos had been packed away. The neighbors they had impressed for years barely got a goodbye. Karen tried to keep up appearances for a while, showing up to interviews in the same blazer she wore to my office, but doors kept shutting. It turns out terminated after internal investigation does not play well on a background check for financial jobs. She picked up part-time work wherever she could, nothing close to what she used to brag about. Robert kept a share of the HVAC company, but it was no longer really his. A new partner came in with spreadsheets and conditions instead of handshakes and family dinners. From what an uncle told me, Robert hated answering to anyone, hated explaining every expense, hated the whispers about why he suddenly needed to sell off assets in the first place. For the first time in my life, consequences were landing on them instead of on the people they leaned on. Allison ended up transferring to a different school district once rumors started circling about her parents. She sent me a long text late one night saying she was angry, embarrassed, and exhausted from feeling like she had to choose between loyalty and honesty. She did not apologize for that dinner, not outright, but she said she finally understood why I stopped laughing at family jokes years ago. I told her I did not need her to choose a side. I just needed her to stop pretending what happened was normal. We are not suddenly close, but there is less static between us and more quiet truth. Janine and I talk more now than we ever did when I was a kid. She sends me photos of her dog and updates about Grandma Marion, who is doing physical therapy and managing her money on her own terms for the first time in a long while. Grandma Marion mailed me a shaky handwritten letter thanking me for not letting them make you small. She said she wished she had spoken up sooner in her own life. I keep that letter in the same folder as all the ugly paperwork, a reminder that not everything that came from this was destruction. Some of it was correction. As for me, my life did not suddenly become a highlight reel. I still pay rent, still answer to a boss, still wrestle with anxiety on some nights, but my credit reports are clean now. The fraudulent accounts are gone. The freeze is still in place, this time because I chose it. I got a small raise at work, not because of my family drama, but because I showed up, did the work, and refused to let their chaos swallow me. The website I built about financial abuse and identity theft inside families started pulling in more traffic than I expected. People I will never meet email me to say my case study helped them stop a parent from opening a loan in their name or gave them the words to talk to a spouse about money. On weekends, I take on a few extra design projects, turning dense legal information into something regular people can actually understand. It feels like reclaiming something my mom warped and turning it toward the opposite end. I wish I could say there was a clean, happy ending where my parents apologized, meant it, and we all sat through an awkward but healing holiday meal together. That did not happen. They are still angry. They still talk about me like I torched the house instead of pointing out it was filled with leaking gas. Maybe that will never change. What has changed is me. I no longer measure my value by how much approval I can squeeze from people who only see me as an investment. I do not hand over my passwords, my signature, or my peace of mind just because someone shares my last name. If there is any lesson here, it is that love and loyalty do not mean letting people use you as collateral for their bad choices. You can care about your family and still protect yourself from them. You can be hurt and still choose the front door of the law instead of sneaking around in the dark. And if you feel even a flicker that something in your finances does not add up, you are not paranoid for checking. Pull your reports. Ask hard questions. Write things down. The people who truly love you will want the truth as much as you do. The ones who do not might call it betrayal when you finally turn on the lights. But sometimes turning on the lights is the only way to see who is actually standing beside you and who has just been using your shadow.